Order N-2920 and the 12th supplement to the mayoral proclamation declaring the existence of an emergency dated February 25th, 2020. Before we proceed further, I'd like to ask Commission staff member Ronald Contreras, who is acting as our moderator, to please explain some procedures for today's remote meeting. Ronald?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The minutes of this meeting will reflect that due to COVID-19 health emergency and to protect Commission members, city employees, and the public, the meeting rooms of City Hall are closed. However, Commission members and staff will be participating in today's meeting remotely. This precaution is taken pursuant to the various local, state, and federal orders, declarations, and directives. Commission members will attend the meeting through video conference and participate in the meeting to the same extent as if they were physically present. Please note that today's meeting is being live cablecast on SF.gov TV and streamed live online at sfgovtv.org/ethicslive. Once again, streamed live online at sfgovtv.org/ethicslive. Public comment will be available on each of the items on this agenda. Each member of the public will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. Comments or opportunities to speak during the public comment period are available via phone call by calling 1-415-655-0001. Again, the phone number is 1-415-655-0001. Access code is 146-525-2262. Again, access code is 146-525-2262, followed by the pound sign, and then press pound again to join as an attendee. You will hear a beep when you are connected to the meeting. You will be automatically muted and in listening mode only. When your item of interest comes up, dial *3 to raise your hand and to be added to the public comment line. You will then hear, "You have raised your hand to ask a question. Please wait until the host calls on you." The line will be silent as you wait your turn to speak. Ensure that you are in a quiet location. Before you speak, mute the sound of any equipment around you, including television, radio, or computer. It is especially important that you mute your computer if you are watching via the web link to prevent feedback and echo when you speak. When the system message says your line has been unmuted, this is your turn to speak. You will hear staff say, "Welcome, caller." We encourage you to state your name clearly. As soon as you begin speaking, you will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you are online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you change your mind and wish to withdraw yourself from public comment line, press *3 again. You will hear the system say, "You have lowered your hand." Once your 3 minutes have expired, staff will thank you and mute you. You will hear, "Your line has been muted." Attendees who wish to speak during other public comment periods may stay on the line and listen for the next public comment opportunity and should raise their hands to enter the public comment line by pressing *3 when their next item of interest comes up. Public comment may also be submitted in writing and will be shared with the Commission after this meeting has concluded and will be included as part of the official meeting file. Written comments should be sent to ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Once again, written comments should be sent to the ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Moderator, can you please proceed with item number 1, the Commission roll call?
Commissioners, please unmute your microphones so they can verbally state you're present at today's meeting after your name is called. Chair Ambrose. I think you're muted, Chair Ambrose. I just unmuted you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Bush.
You're muted too.
Present.
Commissioner Chu.
Present.
Vice Chair Lee.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Present.
Madam Chair, with 5 members present and accounted for, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much, moderator. Here we are again, remotely. It's amazing how many of these meetings we've managed to proceed through. I want to welcome the public's participation today and also ask for their patience as we work through this meeting process. I want to remind the commissioners to please mute your microphones when you're not speaking, just to minimize any feedback. And also remark that for technical reasons, Commissioner Lee is going to try to participate by telephone, so you won't see her on the screen, but when she can or speak up, you'll hear her voice. And with that, I want to call agenda item number 2, public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda. Members of the public who are already on the line and wish to speak should dial *3 if you've not already done so to be added to the public comment line. Moderator, can you please proceed with public comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics Commission is now receiving public comment on agenda item number 2 remotely in this meeting. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment. If you joined the meeting early to listen to the proceedings, now is the time to get into the line to speak. If you have not already, please press *3. It's important that you press *3 only once to enter the queue. And pressing it again will move you out of the public comment line and back into listening mode. Once you are in the queue and standing by, the system will prompt you when it's your turn to speak. So it's important that you call from a quiet location. Please address your comments to the Commission as a whole and not to an individual member. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are any callers in the queue.
Thank you.
Once again, if you have just joined this meeting, we are currently on agenda item number 2, public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. Madam Chair, we have callers in the queue.
Thank you.
Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now. Welcome, caller. Caller, are you there? Okay. We're going to proceed to the next caller. Looks like there might be some technical difficulties there. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now. Okay. Okay, we're going to try the next one. Please stand by. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now. Call in user number 9. We're not getting no response from that individual also. We're going to try caller number 10 again. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now. Well, Chair Ambrose, we are showing that we have 3 callers in the queue. We've gotten no response from all 3 after unmuting them each. How would you like to proceed?
I'm just a little concerned, given the fact that all 3 of them can't speak, that there might be some technical difficulty on our part. So I think what I'd like to do is proceed with agenda item number 3, but come back and call agenda item number 2 again immediately following agenda item number 3, to give those individuals an opportunity to check in and or call back in, so that we could hear from them, because I don't want it. I mean, it seems unlikely that all 3 of them called in and then just hung up. So if that is okay with everyone else, that's what I'd like to do. We'll just continue agenda item 2 and pick it up again after we do agenda item 3, which would be I'm trying to follow my script. Consent calendar. Sorry, I have a, hang on just a minute. My agenda collapsed. So with that, I don't know if I need a motion to, but I'm going to just use my prerogative as chair to call agenda item 2 next. So right now I'm going to call agenda item number 3, which is the consent calendar. The first part of the consent calendar is item number 3, the revised draft minutes for the August 14, 2020 Ethics Commission regular meeting. And item number 4, which are the draft minutes for the September 11th, 2020 Ethics Commission regular meeting. And I'm going to ask first for a motion to hear these 2 items as consent, or ask whether or not any commission member or member of the public in attendance would like to remove one of the 2 items, item 3 and 4, from consent, so that we can discuss them and vote on them individually. And with that, I'm going to ask for both comment from the commissioners, and then we'll take public comment before we act on consent. So do any of the commissioners, let me see, get my participant screen up here so I can see if you've raised your hand. Does anyone, I don't see any hands. So yes, Commissioner Bush, you have the floor. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I move the motion.
You, what's that?
I move the motion that we hear and consider the minutes of these 2 meetings.
Okay, and do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Smith seconds the motion. Okay, and with that, I'd like to ask for public comment. So moderator, can you please see if there are any commenters in the queue for item number 3?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics Commission is now receiving public comment on consent calendar item number 3 remotely in this meeting. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you joined the meeting early to listen to the proceedings, now is the time to get in line to speak. If you have not already, please press *3. It's important that you press *3 only once to enter the queue, and pressing it again will move you out of the public comment line and back into listening mode. Once you are in the queue and standing by, the system will prompt you when it's your turn to speak. So it's important that you call from a quiet location. Please address your comment to the Commission as a whole and not to individual members. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. If you haven't already done so, please press *3 to be added to the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently taking public comment on consent calendar item number 3, revised draft minutes for August 14th, 2020 Ethics Commission regular meeting. If you haven't already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. We do have callers in the queue, Commissioner.
All right.
Chair Ambrose. Good morning, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Ronald, are the callers unmuted?
Yes. Usually when on the attendee list, I have the option to either mute or unmute them, and this particular caller is unmuted at the moment.
It seems like there's a technical issue because all of the callers so far, this is the fourth, has not been able to.
Well, and these are actually the same 3 callers that have been online. Nothing's changed from the first public comment. So they're online. I just don't know why they're not being muted. I mean, we're not hearing anything. All right, let's try caller number 2. Caller, your 3 minutes begins now. Please stand by. I'm just waiting to see if I hear from. Looks like we might go ahead and try to do a test by a Ethics Commission team member to see if they call in and if they haven't, of course, facing issues on that end. Please stand by.
All right. Good idea.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Hey, Commissioner Lee.
I'm connected.
Excellent.
Maybe this is a question for the Deputy City Attorney. What would happen in the event that we cannot fix the technical issue with receiving public comment or hearing public comment as people call in?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I mean, I think the issue at the moment is determining whether or not the error is on our end and that there's something that is precluding public comment because our system is not working versus the technical error is on the user end. Because if our platform is working sufficiently, and individuals are having difficulty unmuting their device, I mean, that's not something in our control, right? So it's a little hard to tell exactly going on at the moment. So I unfortunately need to defer to our technical staff if they're able to sort of diagnose the problem, so to speak.
Can I ask a question? Is there any chance that because that only one attendee can speak at a time? I mean, is it possible that because you have Commissioner Lee as an attendee and her line is live, that another attendee can't be heard? Is that any chance of that?
We have actually, it looks like we have Stephen Massey who's calling in, so I'm going to unmute him to see if it's working.
All right.
Good morning, Stephen.
Hi, this is Steven. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. The other question I would have, can you tell if people are calling in from their computer or their phone? I mean, it seems possible that perhaps a caller called in and they're just waiting to speak on a later agenda item, which would make sense if they were calling in from their computer. They could just leave it idle. I mean, it's hard to believe anybody would have their phone dialed in and just leave it running, with a live call and not speaking. So is there any way to tell the difference between somebody contacting us through the computer or through SFG TV versus from their telephone?
We can see on the WebEx whether the person is dialed in and has their name entered or they're using a telephone.
I mean, it's just a untechnical person making up possible explanations for why there
Sure.
may be a problem. But I'm just wondering, given the fact that, Stephen, you called in, did you call in from your phone or did you go in through WebEx?
I just called in right now. I'm speaking to you from a telephone.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, in light of the fact that frankly, what I'd like to do is proceed with I'm going to close public comment on consent and ask for a vote in light of the fact that our test shows that our system is working and that people are able to call in. I am going to, each time we call an agenda item, if those same three public commenters are in the queue and we can't hear them, I'm going to repeat the test for every agenda item so that we're certain that it is possible for public comment to come through through a telephone call. So unless anyone has another suggestion about how we should proceed, I would like to try and move forward with the meeting. Is that okay? All right, then I'm going to actually ask that we call the roll on the consent. I'm going to actually close public comment on consent items and ask that we call the roll on the motion made by Commissioner Bush and seconded by Commissioner Smith.
A motion has been called and seconded. I will now call the roll. Commissioner Bush,
Yes.
Commissioner Chu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lee, Vice Chair Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Chair Ambrose.
Yes.
With 5 votes in the affirmative and 0 votes opposed, the motion is approved unanimously.
Thank you very much. And I need to advance my script. I'd like to call item, here we go. I'd like to call agenda item number 5, which is.
Are we now going to go back to agenda item number 2?
Oh, yes, thank you. I forgot, although I'm not sure we're going to get a different result, but I did say that we would do that. So I'm going to return to agenda item number 2, which is general public comment on matters appearing or not appearing before the commission. If there are callers in the queue, moderator, can you check to see whether or not we have public comment on agenda item number 2?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics Commission is now receiving public comment again on agenda item number 2 remotely in this meeting. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment. If you've joined the meeting early to listen to the proceedings, now is the time to get into the line to speak. If you have not already, please press *3. It's important that you press *3 only once to enter the queue, as pressing it again will move you out of the public comment line and back into listening mode. Once you are in the queue and standing by, the system will prompt you when it's your turn to speak, so it's important that you call from a quiet location. Please address your comment to the Commission as a whole and not to individual members. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are calls in the queue.
Thank you.
If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently revisiting agenda item number 2, public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you are online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you haven't already done so, please press *3 to be added to the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. Good morning, caller. Your 30 seconds begins now.
3 minutes.
I'm sorry, 3 minutes. Thank you. Caller?
And Ronald, are they the same 3 numbers from the beginning?
Well, yeah, now we're down to 2. And yes, they are both the same.
Okay.
All right, we'll try this caller. Caller, your 3 minutes begins now.
All right, then, Stephen, can you go ahead and call in again so we can once again affirm that it's accessible to anyone who was trying to get in?
Yes, I'll call now.
Thank you.
And Ron, were any of those 2 callers, did they happen to call in during previous meetings?
That I don't know, but yes, I'm getting a message from Jared right now. Okay, I got you, Jared. Okay, let me get back in here. Good morning, caller.
Hi, this is Stephen.
Hi, Stephen. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, it seems to be working.
Okay, perfect. All right.
So I'm going to move on then. We're going to try again. When I call agenda item 5, we'll do the same procedure and test. Potentially these individuals are intending to speak on agenda item number 5. Actually, I'm going to close public comment on agenda item number 2 and move on to agenda item number 5. Discussion and possible action on presentation by Controller's Office on the Controller's September 24, 2020 report, preliminary assessment, gifts to departments through non-city organizations lack transparency, create pay-to-play risk. I'm going to ask Executive Director Leanne Pelham to introduce our speaker from the Controller's Office. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Ambrose. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you to everybody for your patience this morning with the meeting. We continue to work out various hiccups, but we appreciate your patience. And forbearance as we do that. Item number 5 is on your agenda this morning, as a prior report from the Controller's Office was, with the first of a series of preliminary assessments that office is issuing. As this item notes, it is regarding gifts to departments through non-city organizations, and it is a second assessment report that the Controller's Office has issued. It came out on September the 24th, and we very much appreciate that office's willingness to be here today to present an overview to you about that report and to be able to answer any questions that you might have. There is no action required. It's an informational item, but if the commission wishes to take some action or direct the staff in some way, that opportunity does exist, as it is agendized as a possible action item. As you know, these reports have been coming in the wake of the city attorney's investigation and the Controller's Office coordination and looking at procedures and policies in the city that may need to be strengthened to limit the potential for fraud, corruption, or abuse. And the first assessment report was issued on June 29th. We were pleased that Mark De La Rosa, who is the acting director of audits from the Controller's Office, was able to be at that July 10th meeting to present that initial report. This report, Mark is back with us this morning, and it's again to provide you with an opportunity to hear from that office about the findings of that report, the recommendations. And as you know, the issues that speak to areas of the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission, questions, issues, policy matters, will be incorporated into the ongoing policy work that the Commission is doing to make sure that our laws are as strong and enforceable as possible. So we will continue to be in touch with the Controller's Office as additional reports are issued. We anticipate from them that there will be a series of reports. So we look forward to inviting Mark back at future meetings. But for purposes of this morning's meeting, I will turn it over to him to walk through the presentation. The report is linked through our website, so members of the public can follow it there if they haven't already accessed it from the Controller's Office. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Please.
Great. Thank you so much, Executive Director Pelham. Chair Ambrose, members of the Commission, Commissioners Lee, Chu, Smith, and Bush. My name is Mark De La Rosa, and I'm the Acting Director of Audits, as Executive Director Pelham mentioned. May I actually be able to share my screen?
Oh, yes.
I do have a presentation. Thank you. And while you're pulling that up, I'm joined today as well by our Deputy Controller, Todd Riedstrom, in case you have any questions.
Okay.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
Yes.
Great. So as mentioned already, this is the second of our series of preliminary assessments that the Controller's Office is working on. Back in July, we presented the first one on the public works contracting and procurement. This second one is related to gifts provided to the departments by non-city organizations, and in particular, the sub-accounts that Public Works had with the San Francisco Parks Alliance. Just by way of introduction, I think you already know this, back in February, when the Mohammed Noor investigation became public, the Controller's Office set out to conduct a series of assessments related to the internal controls surrounding the various facets of the Mohammed Noor allegations. The goal really for the internal control reviews that we're conducting are to improve transparency, reduce the risk of fraud, and ultimately safeguard our public funds. In conjunction with what we're doing in the Controller's Office, the City Attorney's Office is also focused on their investigations related to any employees and contractors that were involved or outlined in the Mohammed Nuru charges. One of the key things that they just more recently have done as an action item was to begin the debarment process for one of the contractors that were mentioned or involved in the charges. Today, we're going to be presenting to you this second report on, as I mentioned, gifts and support that are benefiting our city departments with a focus on the Parks Alliance, which is a non-city organization. As we did in the previous presentation, these assessments are labeled as preliminary, and we're really wanting to hear from the subject matter experts such as yourselves, this commission, to help in ensuring that the recommendations are actionable and are appropriate. So some of our recommendations are actually worded in a very general sense to provide you the experts and the leaders to determine the best course of action to mitigate the risks and the findings. Just very quickly, as we mentioned in our report, we're focusing on non-city organizations. When we set out our audit, when we started our audit or assessment back in February, we deployed a survey of city departments, all 56 of them, just to make sure and to understand the extent of the presence of these non-city organizations amongst all of our 56 departments. And what we found based on the survey results was that they were able to identify 588 various accounts and sub-accounts. And because of the lack of clarity in terms of what it is that we wanted to survey at the time, we basically got a whole gamut of different types of arrangements that our departments have with non-city organizations, and most of which are things that really go through the regular process, like contracts and grants, fiscal agency, fiscal sponsors. Those are things that typically goes through the regular processes within the city. What we're focusing on in our assessments are the Friends of organizations. The Parks Alliance is the one that the sub-accounts that Public Works had were maintained under. They are a 501c3 organization. They support a number of city agencies as well as other groups within the city. In 2019, just to provide context in terms of their finances, their total revenue in terms of grants and contributions amounted to close to $19 million, and their expenditures amounted to close to $18 million. One thing to note as part of our field work in this is that we gave the draft report to the relevant stakeholders, one of which was the San Francisco Parks Alliance, and they wanted to us to include, and we noted and attribute to them that they wanted to emphasize that they were not aware or they did not know that the fiscal agency that they were providing was being used inappropriately and ethically by the Department of Public Works city officials. They also wanted to emphasize that back in 2019, they reached out to Mr. Nuru to formalize their relationship with the Department of Public Works through an MOU, but that effort was ignored. A couple of very quick background just to set the information. The sub-accounts that I'm referring to that our report refers to basically are four main sub-accounts that are maintained by the San Francisco Parks Alliance that are specific to the Department of Public Works. The contributions and expenses numbers that we have here are for the period of July 2015 through January 2020. That was basically the scope of our review. And this is also based on the information that we received that was maintained by the Department of Public Works as referred to as the Public Works log. One of the One of the sub-accounts is called the DPW Special Project, and they had a total contribution for those 5-year period of about $400,000 out of the 990 total contributions for that same 5-year period. And this is basically the special projects is the main account that contained the payments and the reimbursements related to the various staff appreciation and staff events that we mentioned in our report. The second sub-account is the Clean Team program that they maintain. And this is basically the neighborhood beautification program that Public Works has. And they had a payment and contributions of about close to 200,000 for that same 5-year period. Giant Sweep is another one of the sub-accounts, and that is the anti-litter program that Public Works has. And there were payments and reimbursements that totaled $390,000 for that same period. And there's also the Fix-It team. So those were the 4 main sub-accounts that we found to be in existence within the Parks Alliance. Again, just by way of context and background, this slide right here notes some of the donors that were the main contributors to those sub-accounts. As you can see, the SF Clean City Coalition and Recology combined make up the majority of the donors or the revenues that were going into these public works sub-accounts maintained by the SF Parks Alliance. One of the key things that we wanted to convey in this table is really how some of the same key donors that were providing donations to this public works sub-accounts were also the same ones that were doing business with the city by way of having permits during the time frame that we reviewed, as well as payments that Public Works gave to these same donors during the time period as well. Another one that we wanted to highlight was it wasn't just Public Works that had contracts or payments to these donors, but there were also other departments that contributed or that paid these donors by way of city contracts as well as payments through purchases. This slide 6 basically focuses on how those donations were then expended by the Department of Public Works. And as laid out here, out of the $980,000 that were expended during the time period of 2015 through 2020, the majority or a good portion of them was actually going to, or 38% was going to various employee events, staff appreciation, training, the holiday parties, picnics, and various meals were contributing or were the main expense types for this sub-account. Other expenses were also the various volunteer programs that I mentioned on the Clean Team, the Giant Sweep, and various merchandises, including shirts, hats, tote bags for the various events that Public Works held. This graphic is basically just to show the flow of funds that based on the information that I just shared with you from, as on the top left-hand side, Public Works going into contracts with these certain contractors to complete capital programs, for example, and those same contractors that are doing business with the city, some of those were also contributors to the Public Works sub-accounts that were maintained by the Parks Alliance. Those sub-accounts then are paid out to various vendors. Some of those payments actually went to city employees, or including Department of Public Works employees who expended some monies in relation to the various purposes of this sub-account, including for staff appreciation and other events. So in our assessment, there were, oh, excuse me. Is there a question?
Yes, this is Commissioner Chu. I had a question for you. If you could go back one slide
Certainly.
to the flow of
I can't hear you, Commissioner.
You're frozen, Commissioner Chu.
and the contractors.
Commissioner Chu, you were frozen for a moment, so if you can repeat your comment.
Okay. So my question is, if you go back a slide here, if we look at the flow of funds, I go from public works to city contractors and then down to the sub accounts on the Parks Alliance. In the course of your review, did you come across communication between public works and the contractors and the Park Alliance that that covered the disbursement of these funds?
We did not. The scope of our field work was pretty limited. Part of that is by design, because we did not want to overstep our internal controls reviews. I will certainly defer to the city attorney team that is conducting their investigations that may be able to speak to that specific communication. But in terms of what we looked at the very high level kind of flow of the controls or the lack thereof. So we did not gather that information.
Okay, great, thank you. So follow the money.
That's right.
I had a similar set of questions, although we can talk about whether or not we want to do questions as we go. But so I understand what you're saying, Mr. De La Rosa, that the investigation, say interviews with the donors, for example, or interviews with the SF Clean City, which seems like another bundler of donations that can then get passed on to the Park Alliance. All of that's being handled by investigations by the city attorney's office or DA, and that the controller's office wasn't doing that kind of investigation.
Exactly. That is our understanding. That is the more specific inquiries into the specific donors as well as players within the city are being handled by the city attorney's investigation.
Okay, all right, that's helpful to know. Thank you. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to ask him to proceed. Oh, Commissioner Bush.
Thank you. I wanted to know if you took a look at the boards of nonprofits, because in a number of cases, including Parks Alliance, you have the nonprofit board members who are a mix of lobbyists and city officials, or either appointees or some cases elected officials. And so there's a mingling of factors that are involved in these actions. Did you look at that?
Yes, through the chair, Commissioner Bush. We did not on this particular one. How we basically scoped our assessments was looking at the specific allegations that were contained in the reports from the FBI. We basically took that apart and looked at the various kind of internal controls buckets of things. That certainly is a natural. Your question on the composition of the boards of these nonprofits is certainly one that that is very related in terms of the larger picture. However, that wasn't one of the things that was brought up in the FBI reports and allegations. But it certainly is one that we're interested in finding out as well.
I bring it up because if we're going to use this as a base for considering steps to inhibit corruption, I point out that San Francisco's Campaign and Government Code, Section 3.214, and the Ethics Commission Regulations 3.214-5 requires disclosure of, quote, a professional relationship based on regular contact in a professional capacity, including regular contact and conducting volunteer and charitable activities. As far as I know, while this requirement for a disclosure is in the law, there is no place anywhere where the disclosure can be found. So if you have city officials who are on the boards of nonprofits, there's no place that I know of, either in Form 700s or in anything else posted on web pages, that discloses their relationship with other people who have business before the city. And I think if you're going to proceed down this path, that's something that you might want to take a look at.
Certainly.
And I have raised my hand. One more question. One of the points that the Park Alliance made was that they had reached out to DPW to enter into an MOU with them. Can you answer the question, is there an MOU now between DPW and the Park Alliance? Are these sub-accounts still active? And is a departmental MOU with an entity such as the Park Alliance, is that a contract that gets approved in any kind of formal way by the mayor's office or the city administrator for DPW? Or in the case of, say, if MTA has an MOU with the Park Alliance, is that something that would be at the MTA board?
Right. Yeah. On your first question, I'm not aware of any changes to the relationship between Parks Alliance and Public Works, but we definitely defer to the department or Parks Alliance on that question. We just have not followed up since our field work. On the second one, I will be talking a little later about the various controls that could be implemented, including the establishment of MOUs. We did find that some of the Friends of, including the Friends of the Public Library, is one that's a very well controlled in terms of the controls to make sure that there is transparency and visibility. And from my understanding, the MOU that they have with the nonprofit that they work with, that the library works with their Friends of nonprofit, does goes through their library commission. So there is at least some public discussion as well as approval of that one. But that's just one example that we were able to find.
Okay, great. We're going to let you proceed then with your presentation because I know you have more information. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bush. You're muted, Commissioner Bush.
Thank you. I just wanted to revisit one point here. When we talk about Mr. Naru and how he's soliciting funds from interested parties, including businesses that have contracts with the department, Mr. Naru was also the staff member who made recommendations for rate setting board on the fees that could be charged by Recology. At the same time as he's making the recommendations on how much fees Recology could charge, he was asking Recology to make contributions to his group. And that's the kind of relationship that I think raises questions in the minds of the public if they were more fully aware of them.
All right. Are there, let me look at my screen. Are there any other hands up? Commissioner Lee, I know you have a little more challenge calling in, so because I can't see your hand, but if there are no more questions at this time, I'm going to ask Mark De La Rosa to proceed, and then if you can raise your hand, we'll stop at some discrete point and take more questions. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you.
So on now to the findings and recommendations that we made. There's 5 main buckets of findings that we had in our preliminary assessment. The first one on the topic of inappropriate fundraising. As you may already know, this really pertains to behested payments. And behested payments, as you all know, refer to payments made for any governmental, charitable purposes at the suggestion, solicitation, or request of a public official. As required by the city, as you also may know, when a payment of $1,000 or more is made at their behest by an interested party, certain officials, but not department heads currently, must file the city's form SFEC 3610B, which is the behested payment city officer's form. As currently required, this form is required of all elected officials, so the mayor, board of supervisors, DA, treasurer, as well as commissioners such as yourselves, who are in city commissions, and who are also required to file the Form 700. One of the examples that we provided and that, as Commissioner Bush mentioned, is recology. So the example that we had, and this was based on information that we were able to obtain from the city attorney's public integrity unit, was that the 2019 Office of the City Administrator and Public Works Holiday Party that Mr. Nuru solicited donations specifically for. A majority of the funds that were used for that specific holiday party, or 80% of the $40,000 cost, was from restricted sources, including recology. One of the key areas also that we looked at were the reporting requirements, and the review to ensure that departments and department heads and city staff are complying with the certain requirements related to behested payments. The recommendations that we that basically follow from these findings are that the city should amend the San Francisco Campaign and Government Conduct Code to prohibit non-elected department heads and employees from soliciting donations from interested parties of their department, unless specifically authorized by the Board of Supervisors. Those authorized to solicit donations must file the behested payment form. We also emphasize that any consequences or failure to report, consequences should be made in terms of failure to adhere to compliance with this code. Another one of our recommendations stemming from the findings are that departments should comply with the existing admin code section 10.100-305. This is basically the section in their admin code related to obtaining advance acceptance of gifts from outside sources greater than $10,000 for the department through non-city organizations, including having an explicit language in that acceptance method of how those funds are going to be used. The other related recommendations are having an annual certification from the department heads that of all of the gifts of goods, services, and funds that they have received, and going through the approval process through the Board of Supervisors, and complying with the timeliness of those certification reporting as already currently required in our code. And a couple of other ones are for us, the controller, to ensure that there is sufficient oversight through annual auditing of the various entities related to the findings. And then a general recommendation that we put out there was basically for the city to review and strengthen the consequences of noncompliance. This is by design a very general recommendation, and basically we wanted to, as I mentioned before, defer to the subject matter expert in terms of what those noncompliance and the consequences of those noncompliance should look like. The second set of findings that we had related to the interested party definition. And really the bottom line here was that the interested party definition for vested payments does not clearly include all city contractors. And as you may already know, the Ethics Commission website defines or mentions that the donor is only required to file Form SFEC 3620 if he or she is an interested party. And within this context, an interested party refers to a person who is a party or participant to administrative enforcement proceedings regarding permits, licenses, and other entitlements. A party is someone who files the application or is the subject of the proceeding, and the participant has a financial interest in the decision. State regulations that, as we point out in our report, specify that a license, permit, or other entitlement includes, and I'll quote this, all entitlements for land use, all contracts other than competitively bid, labor, or personal employment contracts in all franchises. Really, one of the key things that we're pointing out here is that the city's definition of an interested party does not explicitly include all city contracts. And so the following recommendation from this finding is for the Ethics Commission to at least consider or have consider revising or having providing a way to expand the definition of who is considered an interested party so that it includes all city contractors. The third set of findings that we had related to anonymous donations prohibition. As you may already know, the city's Sunshine Ordinance requires that no city official or employees shall accept gifts in the form of money, goods, services worth more than $100 unless the amount and source are disclosed. So as currently stands, city departments are required to disclose donor names and whether the donor has a financial interest with the city. According to the city attorney, a financial interest is any contract, grant, lease, or request for license, permits, or other entitlement with or pending before the city. As part of our field work on this, as I mentioned, we surveyed the various departments on the various non-city organizations that they work with, including those that are friends of. And what we did find was that some of those friends of organizations, the donations that they took from some entities were anonymously reported. So our recommendation here is for really for the departments to comply with the Sunshine Ordinance, section 67.29-6 for their non-city organizations by not accepting any donation through anonymous donors from which or for which they cannot identify the source of the funds.
I do want to just stop you
Sure.
there for a minute just to make sure that I'm clear on your recommendation. So as you point out, the Sunshine Ordinance was adopted by the voters. And so if we were to amend the Sunshine Ordinance, we would have to go back to the voters.
That's right.
As an aside, and I don't expect an answer now, it would seem to me that the city could adopt a separate ordinance creating rules about city disclosure and not accepting the city departments not accepting anonymous donations for city purposes without amending the Sunshine Ordinance and having to go to the ballot, given that there is no new election for another 2 years. So Deputy City Attorney Maldonado, if you could just think about that. And when we come back, we're going to be working on these issues in every meeting in the foreseeable future. So I'd just like to understand if there's another way to get at that without directly amending the Sunshine Ordinance. We can have an additive requirement. Commissioner Bush. You're muted, sorry.
I'll get it right one of these times. It may be that one route is to change what's approved and the statements of incompatible activities, so that when a city official signs a statement of incompatible activities and they're in compliance with it, one of the things is that they do not accept contributions without all the disclosures that we're talking about. I have another question related to all of this. When you're looking at the nonprofits and their relationships with city departments, you're looking at sort of standalone nonprofits that exist for a specific period of time. But what about ones that are special? For example, the nonprofit that was created for the America's Cup, which brought in millions of dollars from interested parties, or the nonprofit that was created for the Super Bowl, or the nonprofit for the City Hall Centennial. Together, those things came up to over $10 million coming into the city, solicited by city officials and from entities that had city interests and city business. But I don't see any mention of that type of nonprofit in the report that you've done. Can you take another crack at that part as well?
Yeah, yeah, Commissioner Bush. We mentioned really the scope that we took was a very relatively narrow one, and so the population of the nonprofits that we were able to identify were those that were directly connected to the departments at the time of the survey. Definitely quite aware of those, the two examples that you gave as nonprofits for very specific time-bound events, but for the purposes of what we looked at, it was those that were that had an agreement or some sort of a relationship with the departments at the time of our survey. Noted.
I do. I understand. But for example, the America's Cup, the chair of that nonprofit was also the chair of the Rec and Park Commission, and a lot of what was being done had to do with control over Rec and Park properties along the waterfront. And so there was a clear set of questions that could be raised about that. So I guess what I'm looking at is, while you haven't included that so far, one way or the other, either the commission on its own or with the controller's assistance, would take a look at expanding our viewpoint to include those kinds of things.
Yeah, we'll certainly note that, Commissioner. One of the things that we note in our preliminary assessments is that these are ongoing ones, and that we may add additional elements to the various facets of these reports as appropriate and as we continue our assessments.
And
Thank you.
Clear with respect to the commission's work, and also, of course, as we saw on the agenda, the supervisor Haney and Peskin have some legislation they're working on to address this definition of interested party. Presumably, when we work on that legislation, we will draft it in a way that doesn't just apply to standing nonprofit organizations, but to, as you pointed out, the special purpose event related nonprofits that are created for city functions or city activities. So if there aren't any other, let's see, Commissioner Chu, I see your hand up, and Todd Brightstrom, I see your hand up. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Chu and then Controller Office Todd Brightstrom.
Thank you, Chair Ambrose. Mark, I had a question for you. In your broader report, you had made an observation about tone at the top at the Department of Public Works. Could you speak a little bit more to that? And then I don't know if you were able to look at or find any funds that were devoted to cultivating either, greater awareness or training or compliance culture at the Department of Public Works, and would suggest that you include something in that in the recommendations, because I think that with rules and regulations and legislation, that creates the structure of what needs to be complied with. But then there's also the second piece within any organization, you need to create an awareness of and a mindset and a culture of actually complying. And that if one without the other, I think won't get us to where we want to get to. So if you could speak to that a little bit, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Certainly, Commissioner Chu. That tone at the top is certainly one of the recurring themes. I know I brought it up during the first presentation last time on the public works contracting. On this particular one on gifts, it certainly is one that is also very evident. A couple of examples that we provided was, I think I already mentioned the fact that that the city administrator's office was aware of the efforts to obtain donations by Mr. Nuru from the vendors or from the contractors for the holiday party is one that kind of speaks to the level of tone at the top and the fact that those the awareness existed made the action seemingly okay or allowable. Other examples that we had was that I think one of the ones that we mentioned was how some of the Department of Public Works leadership were also encouraged by Mr. Nuru to obtain donations from various sources, including those that they do business with, as part of their Parks Alliance Public Works sub-accounts. We're definitely going to roll in recommendations on the tone at the top because we see that this is kind of a larger topic that has very real implications in terms of what kinds of training do you provide to the department staff so that they're aware of the various ethical rules as well as what an ethical conduct looks like. Those are things that we're definitely going to be including in our final report. And I know that there are already, even based on the results of our first assessment, already efforts from on the department's end to address those tone at the top issues through possibly more rigorous training, reminder of the ethical obligations that they have. So we'll definitely include that tone at the top, which we know is one of the key root causes of some of the internal control weaknesses that we saw.
Right. Well, so just so you may not be aware, but the Ethics Commission included in its budget for the upcoming current fiscal year, that we're in, funds to develop an ethics at work training program. Unfortunately, it wasn't funded. And so, but I think that that's, in addition to strengthening the laws and regulations in this area, we also have to add that training and compliance
That's right.
component as well in order for any of this to be effective.
Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and let Todd Rydstrom from the Controller's Office speak, and then I'm going to call on Commissioner Lee, who has her hand up. So, Todd, are you available to comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. And Todd Rydstrom, Deputy Controller. To frame this as well, we really welcome all of these questions, and we want to make sure that we do various follow-ups. Again, this is the second of a preliminary assessment, of which there are 4 additional work products that are coming. And so to the degree that you have specific questions, we really do welcome that. A number of the recommendations, as you've noted, including the one similar to or related to Commissioner Bush's recent question, are general recommendations that allow for not only our office, but other oversight bodies who may wish to take other legislative and or regulatory actions sooner. And so, for example, the recommendation number 1, the prohibition of non-elected department heads from soliciting donations from interested parties and what that would look like, can be further defined either in voter legislation and or board adopted legislation and or commission types of regulations or other types of definitions. And so this is just to reamplify, we welcome all these questions. We won't have answers to everyone today, and some of them we will defer to preserve the integrity of the investigation ongoing to the city attorney's office. So thank you very much. We'll answer whatever we can today.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rydstrom. And Commissioner Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. First of all, I think we need to be really careful with the definition of nonprofits because it's such a general term. And as Commissioner Bush has mentioned, there is a difference between nonprofits that was set up for a single purpose, a time-sensitive project versus the long-standing community benefit service organizations who's been serving the communities. So I hope that moving forward, as you make your presentation, to please keep that in mind, that we're not talking about the nonprofits who are delivering meals, who are serving the homebound, isolated folks when you're talking about these investigations. Secondly, in terms of disclosure and transparency, I hope that because it appears that in many departments, they are supposed to have a disclosure of some sort that they've been received. They have either MOUs or they have received certain kinds of contributions, but it's always just the organizations. So is there any way that the average reader, let's just say if Department of Public Works have disclosed that they have received, friends of, cleaning up the bay, which means nothing to the average reader. But if at the same area they could put in the board of officers of these organizations, who are they? That would make a lot more connections to the general reader. And the third question that I have is because these are nonprofits, so for the folks who are making the donations, whether they are businesses who are vendors with the city departments, they could technically claim their quote unquote donations as a charitable contribution. So they might be double dipping in terms of those contributions. So is there any way that the controller's office can do more investigation and see if that's the case? Because that's another area that I think that we should really look at.
Yes. Good sets of notes and questions. And actually, that is a very good transition to, I do have a couple more findings that I wanted to emphasize. And I think one of the set of recommendations do speak to Commissioner Lee's point on the Controller's Office conducting a series of a more robust set of assessments and audits related to gifts received by the departments.
Okay, I'm going to let you proceed then. Go ahead, Mr. De La Rosa.
A few more, probably 3 or 4 more slides. So the next set of findings basically relates to how the sub-account lacked city oversight. As I mentioned, we did a benchmarking of the various friends of accounts or organizations that work with our city departments, and we basically benchmarked what existed at Public Works with Parks Alliance, with the Friends of Public Library, and the Rec and Parks Alliance relationship. So what we did find was that for both of the other, the Rec and Park and Public Library one, they did have an MOU that delineated the relationship between the departments and the nonprofit organization. There were also a very clear set of procedures to provide transparency related to any gifts that the department receives from the nonprofit or from the Friends of account. So there was an accept and expend provision in the contract itself. There's also a recognition of the compliance with the Sunshine Ordinance on the anonymous donations. So that's definitely emphasized in the Friends of Public Library. The set of recommendations that we basically had was for the city to require the departments to have an MOU, an established formal agreement with the non-city organizations to formalize their relationship, and similar to what I just mentioned, and allow and accept and expend compliance with the Sunshine Ordinance. We also add here the authority, including granting the controller the audit authority that would, as Commissioner Lee pointed out, would at least provide us with the authority to audit and go into the books to ensure that compliance as well as transparency and accountability measures are in place. And other reporting requirements as well to be included in that MOU, and having a clearly defined set of roles and responsibilities. The last one that we just wanted to point out as part of our finding section relates to how those sub-accounts that Public Works had with Parks Alliance were used. So really just making a point that most of the funds that we reviewed were really for staff appreciation. And one of the key things that we mention in our report is that the city does not usually promote staff appreciation through departmental funds, meaning that there's not always a budget line for this kind of an effort or a thing that city departments budget for. Although we do acknowledge that such appreciation may or have their own benefits, that's definitely well worth it. That could increase employee morale, recognize the good work of the staff. And so the recommendation that followed basically is for the city to make it easier for departments to allocate or use certain funds for staff appreciation, obviously within limit, that have certain provisions on their explicit appropriations and purposes. As Todd mentioned, this is the second in a series. We do have other ones that are in the pipeline. We're currently in the process of completing the third one on the ethical standards for commissioners, which will definitely I'm sure will be of interest to the Ethics Commission regarding the procurement authorities that they have. And so we are using the Airport Commission, given that that was the main focus of the Mohammed Nuru investigation. We are also working on a deliverable related to the debarment process that the city has. We're working on a review of the various policies and practices in awarding permits at the Department of Building Inspection. And as I mentioned, additional reviews and assessments may be included as we proceed with our assessments, and that a final report will basically put a bow on this whole series of assessments and recommendations, with, of course, input from various entities such as this commission. Just wanted to actually thank Executive Director Pelham for the input that she provided, as well as the other city departments that also contributed in terms of information, in terms of review, in making this assessment possible. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. De La Rosa. I am going to entertain questions from the commissioners about this last section of your presentation, and then I want to go to public comment. So before I entertain questions, I do want to say if any members of the public intend to offer public comment for this item, they should dial in now and enter *3 to be added to the public comment queue. Commissioners, do you have questions for Mr. De La Rosa or Mr. Rydstrom? If so, please indicate by raising your hand and I will call on you. And I see Commissioner Chu, you had your hand up first, if you wanted to go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to thank both Mr. De La Rosa and Mr. Rydstrom for the work, this tremendous work that they've done on behalf of all of us here in San Francisco, and appreciate you both coming today, and look forward to upcoming reports and partnering with you to make greater transparency and clean government a reality here in San Francisco. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bush.
Yes, thank you. I'd also like to echo the thought of appreciation for the work that you all have done. You've certainly put us on the path. There's some ways to go, but you've put us in the right direction, and we haven't had that for a long time. In the process of doing your final reports, I'd appreciate it if you could include some information on what it will cost to do the work that you're outlining, because some of the things that you're proposing include more extensive auditing and so forth. And I know that we're hard pressed at ethics to have funding for that kind of work. So if you have a proposal about what it would cost and what department should do the work, that would be important for us to have. Thank you.
All right, and Commissioner Lee, did I see your hand up there? Commissioner Lee?
Thank you. Thank you. I want to echo my colleagues' sentiments. Thank you so much for the really good report. I just have one question to Mr. De La Rosa. Do you plan to at least present a brief summary to keep the public informed, either via a press briefing or just a press release? If that, I think the commission would be more than happy to help you disseminate this information.
A good question, Commissioner Lee. We actually did issue, as part of our public integrity work products, we have been issuing press releases. We actually also did present the same set of slides at last week's Government Audit and Oversight Committee at the Board of Supervisors, which is another set of avenue that we try to share with the public our findings and recommendations. But we certainly will keep that in mind.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then I just had a question. I did get a chance to watch the government audit presentation, so thank you for that. But are there other commissions who are inviting you to present? Because I would imagine each commission, or at least some of the larger department-related commissions, the ability to adopt their own policies, consistent with, say, for example, what the Library Commission did. So is there a schedule for you to present to other commissions?
Yeah, the only one that's currently on the schedule is we'll be presenting the same slide deck on assessment number 1 and number 2 to the Citizens General Obligation Bond Oversight Committee, or CGOBOC. They do serve as our audit review board for the City Services Auditor of the Controller's Office. We'll be presenting before them on the 19th of October. As for the other commissions and departments, we have not yet, but we wouldn't be surprised if we were asked to also present.
Okay, all right. And with that, I'm going to turn back to the moderator and ask if we have any public comment on this item. Hopefully it works.
Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently on public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 5, discussion and possible action on presentation by Controller's Office on Controller's September 24, 2020 report. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Madam Chair, we do have a caller in the queue. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners and Director Pelham. My name is Dr. Derek Kerr, a whistleblower. While we appreciate the reviews conducted by the Controller's Office and the City Attorney's Office, these reports are limited hangouts. 3 issues have not been addressed. Number 1, why did our own watchdog agencies miss the rot? 2, why does the FBI so often lead the way in these anti-corruption investigations? And 3rd, why do city whistleblowers go to the FBI when we have 3 city agencies that supposedly investigate misconduct? Last year, the Controller's Whistleblower Program received 600 tips. 108 of them, or 18%, related to the Departments of Public Works, Public Utilities, Building Inspections, and the City Administrator's Office, all of which were implicated in the FBI investigation. The City Attorney's Office has received some of these complaints, and likely the Ethics Commission also. How many of these complaints pointed to the very corruption that the FBI eventually uncovered? I have 2 suggestions. The Controller's Whistleblower Program, the City Attorney's Public Integrity Team, and the Ethics Enforcement Division should audit the complaints that they have received in the past 5 years to determine how many previously warned about this corruption. Second, instead of solely promulgating more regulations and laws that will not enforce themselves, why not encourage decent employees to report wrongdoing? That can be done by doing a better job investigating complaints, including retaliation complaints. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, caller. Are there any other public commenters in the queue?
Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no more callers in the queue.
I did want to say, in response to the last public comment, we have, I think, extended an invitation to the Controller's Office whistleblower program to make a presentation, I believe, at the next meeting in November, where we would have a public review of the Controller's Office's third quarter whistleblower report and an opportunity to discuss among the commissioners and with the benefit of public comment, some of what the caller was just raising, the fact that there is a significant increase now in light of the work of the FBI in the number of whistleblower complaints that are coming in, that both the Controller's Office, the City Attorney's Office, and the Ethics Commission have a shared responsibility to make sure that those whistleblower complaints are heard and that the whistleblowers are encouraged and feel protected. So that will be the focus of one of our agenda items at the meeting in November. And with that, if there are no, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bush.
I'd just like to add on to your comment about how things are enforced, that I think it's a strong recommendation for ethics and our law to adopt the same kind of authority for private attorney right of action to get enforcement when it appears that the government itself is not doing the enforcement. We do that already on environmental laws in San Francisco. We have the same provision when it comes to nonprofit housing developers so that they can sue to do that. We do not have it in ethics, though it does exist at the state level and in Los Angeles and other jurisdictions. So I think that that would empower people who are filing complaints to go ahead and move forward with those complaints under the same kind of terms that exist in other provisions. Thank you.
All right. And if is there any other further comment? If not, then I'm going to close public comment on this item. There are no further callers in the queue, correct, moderator?
That is correct.
All right, so public comment on agenda item number 5 is closed. There is no action, although I will say this is to be continued. We look forward to the next report from the Controller's Office and to agendizing and working on these issues with the board on the legislation that they have proposed to pick up on some of the Controller's recommendations. And with that, actually, I want to call agenda item 6, which is the discussion of the monthly staff policy report. Patrick Ford is going to make a presentation to us. But let me actually just stop for a moment. It is 11 o'clock right now. Does everyone want to take just a 5-minute break before we, yes, there's a yes to that. Okay, Pat, I'm sorry to call you up, but we're going to come back at in 5 minutes and hear your presentation. Thank you.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
This is Pat Ford, Senior Policy and Legislative Affairs Counsel. You have the October policy report before you, so I won't rehash it, but glad to answer any questions about it. I guess I will just point out, you just heard a lot of really interesting recommendations from the Controller's Office based on their really detailed review of nonprofit.
Yourself. Sorry, Commissioner Chu, do you want to mute yourself? Great, thanks. Go ahead, Pat.
And I'll definitely be continuing to review those and working with Mr. De La Rosa on making sure we fully understand those recommendations and bringing them into this project, because I think they're very worthwhile recommendations. Also, just want to point out that next week we'll be having 2 interested persons meetings as part of the Conflict of Interest Review Project. The first one is on Tuesday the 13th at noon. The second one is Thursday the 15th at 3 p.m. And members of the public that want to join should email me at patrick.ford@sfgov.org. And you can also visit our website to see the announcement for the meetings, and that has my email on it as well. So you can RSVP. I sent out the links to the meetings yesterday, as well as instructions on how to join the meetings. They'll be conducted through WebEx, just like this commission meeting is. And also would like to encourage any of you on the commission, if you're available, to please join. I think in the past, it's been very effective to have commissioners present. Of course, we can only have 2 present at a time so that there's not a quorum, there's no Brown Act issues. But I think having 1 or 2 present has been really great in the past, so that you can interact with the interested persons if you'd like, or just listen to them. And you just get an idea of what they're saying, and I think it's been a very good part of the process. So again, those meetings are just coming Tuesday the 13th at noon, and Thursday of next week at 3 p.m. Just shoot me an email if you'd like to join. There's still room for commissioners.
Actually, on that note, I know that Commissioner Bush had expressed an interest in participating in the interested persons meeting on October 13th. But because there can only be 2 participants, I wanted to know, if not now, then soon, if you can let me know whether or not you wanted to participate. I'll defer to you if there is nobody. Anyway, go ahead.
I would like to participate, but excuse me, obviously want to observe the 2 commissioner person limitation. So whatever day would permit is best. If there's room, I would love to participate.
Okay, so on as between the 13th at noon or the 15th at 3, is there one that's better for you?
I think the 13th at noon.
Okay, then I'm going to assume that Commissioner Bush and Chu will participate at that meeting, and then I can do it on the 15th at 3, but I'll defer if anyone else needs to participate.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Lee?
I also would like to participate. The only problem is the only time I can make it was the noon one. So I wonder if Commissioner Chu would mind switch?
I'll switch.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll switch.
Thank you.
Okay, then that'll be Commissioner Bush and Lee for the meeting on the 13th. I'd like to do it if it's okay with you, Commissioner Smith. So that would be Commissioner Chu and myself on the meeting at the 15th at 3.
That's fine. I can't do it on the 15th. So thank you for asking.
Okay. All right. So that's the plan. And then, of course, this will be reported back on by Pat Ford at the agenda meeting in November, so that whatever we learn from the stakeholder group meetings, I'm sure he can summarize that and bring it back to the commission. And with that, I'm going to let you go back to your presentation, Pat.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's wonderful that we'll have commissioners at the meeting. So thank you for being available for that. I think that's all I wanted to mention about the interested persons meeting. So I guess also just that any participants, including commissioners, who will have the opportunity to share any ideas or proposals that they have, also any materials that they want to share, any studies, reports, journalism, anything they have. There will be a chat feature as part of the meeting that will enable people to share links to online content. So I'm hoping that that'll be a new feature that we haven't previously had since the meetings have been in person. So I'm curious to see how that will play out. So there may be some good information sharing there. Also on the conflict of interest project, I think this was alluded to earlier in the meeting, but there is legislation pending now that was introduced by Supervisors Haney and Peskin that pertains to behested payments. It would adopt some of the recommendations made by the Controller's Office as part of their report. I think that I'm hoping to get some feedback from folks at the meetings next week on the legislation. I sent it out with the confirmation emails yesterday. And it would be eager to hear any feedback from the commissioners too during that meeting. And I think it's probably a good approach potentially to do the project in a phased manner, similar to what was done for the public financing review, where the first phase focused on more administrative features and how appeals and submissions are handled. The second phase touched on more of the matching ratio and the amount of funds that candidates can get. I think it was helpful to break that up. And since there's pending legislation here, I think it might be useful to do behested payments as part of the first phase and then move on to the other topics that have been identified in the project. So that's another thing I'll be looking for feedback on at the IP meetings next week.
Through the chair, I have a question about the timing of this legislation. I'm happy to see that and hear that Supervisor Haney has reached out for staff feedback on the proposed ordinance or proposed changes. And is their timeline going to sync up with our interested persons meeting so that we can solicit feedback, and then you're going to bring it back to us in November? Is that a timeline that is going to allow for Ethics Commission comments to be taken into account before the legislation goes to either committee or up to the full board?
I'm not entirely sure right now. I haven't been able to get good clarity yet from either of the sponsors' offices. I am scheduled to talk to an aide in Supervisor Haney's office on Tuesday of next week. So hopefully we'll get some clarity as to what their plan is for this ordinance. I was advised by Deputy City Attorney Shen that the commission's approval is not required for this ordinance, and I think I noted that in the report.
Yeah, what is that?
His advice to me, he's not here today, otherwise I would turn this to him right now, but his advice to me was that the language regarding amendment that is in CFRO and also in the conflict of interest code that says the commission's approval is required, the 4/5 vote of the commission is required, is not present in the chapter of the code that contains the behested payment rules, which is Article 3, Chapter 6. And his understanding of why that is that CFRO, the Campaign Finance Reform Ordinance, and the Conflict of Interest Code were created through the ballot measure process. So that has kind of default language saying that only the voters or a supermajority of both the Ethics Commission and the board can amend those chapters. But since the behested payment rules, Article 3, Chapter 6, was created through regular board legislation, although also it was created through a vote of the commission, that doesn't have that language. So anyhow, that's why that is, and it adds this wrinkle that typically when the commission's working on legislation, it's with the understanding that the commission must approve it in order for it to move forward. That's not the case here. And thus far, I haven't been able to establish a plan with the sponsors as to what involvement they envision for the commission. But I do know that the aide from Supervisor Haney's office is planning to attend the interested persons meetings next week. So there definitely is a willingness on their part to work with the commission. They're definitely seeking feedback. And I hope that this timeline can accommodate the commission taking this up at the November meeting and hopefully voting on it at the meeting too, or at least giving feedback at that meeting.
Can you clarify? I believe the legislation, I assume, was introduced on roll call and is subject to a 30-day hold. So when's the earliest that the board could have a committee hearing? And I see the Deputy City Attorney put her hand up. So Jenica, did you want to comment? You're on mute. There you go.
Thank you, Chair Ambrose. Yes, no, I'm just confirming that it is currently on a 30-day hold.
All right.
And that happens, I can pull it up and see, but it's still pending. We definitely have some time to go on that.
So then after the 30-day hold, it'd be considered for a committee hearing, presumably government audit, since that's the one that Supervisors Haney and Peskin are on. Okay, so in any event, even if the commission's vote is not required, I'm sure that we're free to make recommendations and certainly to take our own action, either endorsing the final version of legislation that they put forward and or recommending amendments to it. But that does put a responsibility on us to track this in between meetings. And I think, Pat, you're having the interested persons conversations, in the next week will certainly facilitate that. But it does mean that the executive director should work with you in tracking that to see if a specific recommendation or action item needs to be put on calendar for the November. I think our meeting is on November 11th, no, November 13th or something. It's rather late next month. Anyway, so if you can just make a note of that, that if time is of the essence and we need to weigh in, we'll need staff to initiate a actual agenda item for the meeting in November so we can discuss it, take public comment, and formulate our own opinion about how best to proceed. Commissioner Bush.
I'd like clarification from the city attorney and from you, Chair Ambrose, about whether or not, if we have proposals for the commission to consider as recommended changes, can we circulate that as an email amongst ourselves, even knowing it will become public, but nevertheless an opportunity rather than waiting for the next commission meeting to share thoughts that any of us may have about amendments or clarifications?
Unfortunately, that would offend the Brown Act. I appreciate as a practical matter, there's definitely utility to doing that, but that is a out of session discussion.
So it would have to be something that would be announced that we were going to circulate the?
No, you would just agendize it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Chair Ambrose.
Yeah, any communication between more than or 3 or more commissioners is a meeting and would have to be noticed and agendized and public comment invited. So that isn't how we're going to be able to proceed. Certainly, if the staff initiates a proposal for endorsing the board's legislation or recommending amendments to it, and they put it on the agenda and the public can see it, then we can all look at it and formulate our own opinions. And actually 2 commissioners could talk about it, although there is some risk there, because if one of those commissioners then talks to a 3rd commissioner, then you've got a seriatim meeting problem. So I think we need to assume that we will each independently sort of follow what happens at the board on this in the next 30 days, and that staff will initiate an agenda item for action that the public and we can individually consider, but that we're not going to be able to come up with a group plan between now and November. And frankly, I mean, if there was a 30-day hold, at best, they would be having the government audit meets the 1st and 3rd Thursday. So I mean, it seems to me unlikely that they're going to have a committee hearing before we have our meeting. But we'll just have to defer to staff to track that for us. And for that matter, even if they have their committee hearing, we can still take an action on the 13th. If it is the 13th, I have that in my head.
Yes.
We can still take an action on the 13th because the matter clearly isn't going to get to the full board before the 13th of November. And it seems to me both the supervisors who had introduced this are going to be open to our recommendations. I mean, it's a very complicated set of definitions and problem that we're trying to solve with respect to the defining interested parties and how to pick up contracts, et cetera. So, you know, I feel reasonably certain that they'll be open to the Ethics Commission's recommendations. But I want
to, in addition to the problem of defining interested parties, we need to have a good definition of what constitutes legislative activity, because behested payments can go for 3 purposes: charitable, educational, or legislative. And legislative covers a multitude of concerns, including paying for your own staff.
Okay, noted. And I think that's something to go ahead, Jenica. You have your hand up. You're muted.
I'm just looking at the board's website. The legislation was introduced on September the 29th. And so if you're counting backwards from that date on a 30-day hold, we're looking at end of October. So I mean, it's not implausible that a GAO could calendar for the following week, which would be prior to when the commission meets, but it's also not guaranteed.
Okay, so Pat, when you talk to Supervisor Heaney's staff, if you can ask them if that's their intention to hear it in committee the first week of November, or if they can wait till their meeting in the third week of November to have our input, or frankly, if they had the hearing the first week in November, they're likely to introduce their own amendments to the legislation, because I'm sure they're getting feedback as well. And that would give us a chance to see whatever revised legislation they're initiating and hear the public comment at government audit before we act. So either way, I'm assuming we're going to be able to cooperate with them and have advance notice, and that it'll go back and forth between all of us. Anyway, thanks for that, Jenica. I do want to get to public comment on this item. I know there are some commissioners who have to leave within the hour. So if you don't mind, if there are any members of the public that intend to offer public comment for this item, they should dial in now and enter *3 to be added to the public comment queue. And while we're waiting to see if there are any commenters in the queue, are there any further comments from the commissioners or questions for Mr. Ford?
Chair Ambrose, yes, I have a question for Mr. Ford on the Form 700 filers. Last time we spoke, there were some very late stragglers on the Form 700 filings. Do we have an update on the number of outstanding Form 700 filers?
I personally don't. I would probably punt that question to the executive director's report. I'm not sure if she has updated statistics on filing this month.
Okay, well, when we get to that, that would be great. I'd be interested to know how many have yet to file, and of the many who have not yet filed, what number have left their positions have not filed the final Form 700, and then how many are currently sitting as commissioners or other appointees, board members who need to have filed but have not filed. Thank you.
All right. And moderator, are there any public comment in the queue? And you are muted, Ron.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently on public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 6, discussion of monthly staff policy report. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you are online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
All right. Thank you, moderator. With that, public comment is closed on agenda item 6. I'm going to now call agenda item 7, which is discussion of the monthly staff enforcement report. And I'm going to ask Jeff Pierce to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Ambrose and commissioners. How's the audio this time? I think last month I perceived that people might have had some trouble hearing me. It's okay today?
Yeah, hear you.
Okay.
Fine. Thanks.
All right, very good. So you've had the report, you've had a chance to review it. I'll highlight just a couple of things and then turn it over to questions. One is we held over on this month's report the notice about the FPPC's Law and Policy Committee meeting. We had presented last month that they had intended to review their streamlined administrative program at the state level, and that item had been continued from the September meeting. They did hear that item this month, 2 days ago on Wednesday. It's on our agenda for your interest. As you know, a year ago, the Enforcement Division approached the Commission with a list of improvements that we were making to our processes. At that time, we asked for your approval that we move forward with a project to review and possibly expand our fixed penalty policy, which we would intend to implement as an expanded streamlined administrative resolution program. The Commission did provide its approval for that project. The project is ongoing. Regrettably, it's been delayed for a number of reasons, including the pandemic. But our own proposal builds on the experience and the recommendations of the FPPC. It will not be identical to theirs because our circumstances are somewhat unique compared to their jurisdiction, which covers the entire state. But we have continued to monitor any changes or proposals that the FPPC has made to their own program so that we might be able to incorporate insights from their experience into how we propose our own ahead of implementing it. So I noted a handful of changes that the FPPC is proposing to their program as a result of their experience implementing it over the last year and a half. And I'm happy to discuss any of those particular recommendations, but I would just note that with respect to our own program, the executive director has had time to review the proposal. I'm working again with Senior Investigator Eric Willett, who is chiefly in charge of drafting the regulations that will govern our program. And our next step, once Eric and I are able to develop those amended drafts, would be to place those proposals in front of interested persons. Our ambition will be to do that as we did a year ago, after the election, but before Thanksgiving. If we can move the draft along as quickly as that. If we're unable to do it before Thanksgiving, we would hope to do it before the winter holidays. So that's an update on our fixed penalty policy. Just as a reminder, we have an existing policy, but it covers only 5 types of violations, all in the campaign finance context. The goal of expanding it is to increase predictability and transparency for the regulated community, but also to enable staff to devote fewer resources to smaller kinds of violations that result in lesser public harm or which require less significant investigation in order to free up resources so staff can focus on investigating the matters that the Commission has identified as being of greater value to the public. The proposal that Eric has developed at this point includes not 5 violations in the campaign finance context, but more than 40 violation types across all areas of the Commission's enforcement jurisdiction, with the exception of retaliation, which is unlikely to be suitable for streamlined handling. Any questions from the Commission about this aspect of the report?
I don't see any hands up. I do see a hand up. Commissioner Bush.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of quick questions. In some cases, an enforcement action is referred on to other departments. For example, if it's signs that are on public transportation under SMTA that are political signs and they're not supposed to be up there, they go over to SMTA. Which departments are recipients of referred complaints that start off at ethics? And how is that handled? Because in those cases, that enforcement action comes from a department that's headed by a political appointee, as opposed to ethics, which does not have a head that's a political appointee. So there's a question that needs to be asked about that. The second question I have is that the FPPC now has a online system for filing complaints about advertisements having violated whatever provisions they may be, whether it has sufficient disclosures on it or whatever else it is. Is there some way that having San Francisco participate in their online review provide greater flexibility for staff so that you don't have to take up staff looking at each individual mailer and so forth, but that would become part of the online process? Those are my two questions.
Thank you. To your first question, you're right. We receive many complaints that are outside of the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. Typically, investigators and I will work to identify which agency, whether it's local or state or federal, might be a more suitable entity to handle the allegations contained in that complaint. And then if we can identify which agency is better situated, we will either communicate with the complainant and direct them to which agency we think is better suited, or we will make the referral ourselves and notify the complainant. Your question regards whether that process is effective in light of potential political considerations that may exist among the entities who receive those referrals. I don't know fully how to address that concern. I would note only that the law sets out who has jurisdiction over what kinds of violations. And so if there is in fact a political problem with certain entities handling certain kinds of violations, I believe that is more of a legislative problem than a procedural problem, and could require some kind of a legislative fix. Go ahead.
In that regard, let's take ads that are placed, or the way that rec and park facilities are used. So it would go to the Rec and Park Commission, and maybe the complaint would be about someone who's chair of the committee at the board who oversees the Rec and Park Commission. So there's obviously a problem. So is there something where you could identify where those buckets are, and then you can make a recommendation to the commission of whether we would like to see those that enforcement power given back to the Ethics Commission?
Can I interject though with a clarifying question? I mean, if there's an allegation that somebody, even if it concerns the underlying activity concerns Rec Park or the Airport Commission, if it's a violation of the Good Conduct and Government Code, then the Ethics Commission would have jurisdiction. We wouldn't just refer it to that other department, correct? So it's only where we don't have jurisdiction because it's, say, an allegation that somebody is, whatever, barbecuing in the park and they didn't have a permit for a barbecue. That's the kind of thing that we would say, you need to talk to Rec Park about that, right? I mean, if it's an ethical violation, we wouldn't just throw it over to the other department.
I think that's true, but I have seen referrals to the departments for signs on buses that urge that somebody get elected. I've seen parks reserved. I've seen fire trucks festooned with election signs. I've seen the chief of police appearing in campaign ads.
Right. So those are good examples, just, for clarification. So those wouldn't those though be dual violations, Jeff? I mean, if just take the example of well, I don't know, maybe an ad on a city bus would violate MTA policy, but it wouldn't violate the code. I'm assuming it's, well, I'm not going to assume. I'm going to ask you the question.
You're right that there is a provision in the government ethics ordinance that prohibits political activity on city property. There is always a factual question, or maybe it's a legal question about what qualifies as city property. We've had to look at this a time or two. We reviewed in the past a complaint about political advertisements not on the buses themselves, but at bus stops. And what we determined in that instance was that that actually falls under an exception because it's public property that can be used for various purposes, and that the advertising there is actually governed by a private third-party entity. But to your broader question, Chair Ambrose, you're correct. Some of what Commissioner Bush is describing does regard prohibited political activity on city property, and if we were to confirm, yes, this qualifies as city property, or this was done on city time, or to Commissioner Bush's other point, if a public official appeared in uniform, that would be something that we could retain within our jurisdiction. But following the charter's process, we would, of course, refer it to the city attorney and the district attorney for their review before we could proceed with an internal investigation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me. I just wanted to understand what, that we would, if we had jurisdiction, we are not going to surrender our jurisdiction to the other department. It's just where either the facts or we don't have jurisdiction. I'm looking, Commissioner Bush, can we proceed? Because I know there are two other elements of your report, Mr. Pierce, that
I just had the remaining question about the FTPC.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I'm happy to speak with the state agency about whether residents or concerned citizens of San Francisco might post advertisements to that state system. I don't see anything that would prevent it, but I don't know what kind of coordination might take place between the state office and our own. I would note two things. One is that we can easily receive complaints about disclaimer violations via email, and have in the past. Citizens will take photographs and send them to us with a question about whether it's compliant. But the second thing I would note would be that the commission has, for more than a year, signaled that it believes that disclaimer violations are low priority compared to some other things that the enforcement division could be spending time on. So if your point is that the state agency might handle that aspect of our jurisdiction on our behalf, that would require some kind of an MOU and a clearly defined relationship, and probably a contract and payments to the state agency to handle that.
I guess the bottom line is, would it save staff time? Because I see enforcement actions that seem to circle around disclosures, either the size of the type or whether or not it has the information about where further information can be found. Any of all those things have to do with what's printed on door hangers and mailers and other ads.
If we spent no time on those complaints, certainly it would save staff time. An alternative would be that if and when we get the streamlined administrative resolution program implemented, in theory, we could handle those on an accelerated timeline, but that remains to be seen.
I wanted to ask.
Thank you.
So the state system is for it's some kind of software program that I assume that allows them to visually check compliance with state law, or is the FPPC program set up so it could determine whether or not the ads in San Francisco complied with San Francisco law?
It's set up based on state law, but it has an option of arrangements with local governments to enforce local policy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just
okay.
recently announced a change at the FPPC to allow local governments to file complaints.
Okay, actually then Director Palma, if you and Mr. Pierce, if you could just find out, I mean, I hear what you're saying, we would have to have an MOU or potentially maybe they're going to generously set up programs for local jurisdictions and not charge local government for participating in that. But if you can just, poke around and see what the FPPC offer is on that, I think would be curious, because part of the reason for streamlining on the violation side is because it's not the most egregious affront to our ethics laws, but at the same time, we don't want anyone to think that we don't have time to make sure that they're doing the disclosure that we very carefully set out as our requirement. So if there is a quick and dirty way, or maybe there's that software or something that we could put in a future budget for our own, sort of personal use and control. But so when you get a chance, if you can look at that some more. I did want to, if we can, then move on to the discussion about the investigations that are referred to other departments and your timeline. So, Mr. Pierce, if you could talk about that.
Thank you, Chair Ambrose. Yeah, you're aware that we've added this to the enforcement report at the request of Commissioner Bush. The charter requires the Ethics Commission to refer to the city attorney and district attorney information in its possession that gives reason to believe that a violation of law has occurred. So effectively, anytime commission staff want to open an investigation, we review a complaint or facts alleged. Sometimes those complaints are staff generated, they're internal. We conduct a preliminary analysis and we write up a review of what we believe the violations to include. And then we send that analysis along with any underlying information to our counterparts at the city attorney's office and district attorney's office. The charter provides that those offices can effectively pluck those complaints up and conduct an investigation of their own. The commission, in January of 17, adopted a policy that partially governs what this process may look like. So at that time, the commission reviewed the landscape and determined that effectively what we would do would be, anytime the city attorney or district attorney requested that we suspend our own investigation, sort of to stay out of their way, we would do so for 90 days, and then we would reevaluate whether we might continue to do so. The reason that we might suspend our own investigation is, there's a couple of reasons. One would be that there are sometimes due process considerations that more heavily govern in the criminal jurisdiction than in the civil or administrative. And so it may happen that an administrative agency or a civil agency like the city attorney's office can obtain evidence that the district attorney cannot and must not obtain. And so if the district attorney wants to move forward with an investigation, we always have to be sensitive to what those constitutional protections entail. And we also have to understand that the district attorney may wish to retain primary access to witnesses. They may wish to ensure that the integrity of their investigation is not in some sense disrupted by something that another agency is attempting to do. We also recognize that in the hierarchy of liability, arguably criminal liability is the most severe civil liability after that, and administrative liability being being the least severe. So we acknowledge that when the city attorney or district attorney expresses an interest in a matter, it may be that the public's interest is better vindicated by allowing those offices to pursue those higher forms of liability. This month's report identifies 3 matters that remain on hold, one with the city attorney and one with the district attorney. I would note that that's 3 out of a total of 66 matters on the Enforcement Division's investigative docket. One of those you'll have seen is still within the 90-day window, but 2 of them obviously have exceeded that window, one with the district attorney being 9 months old, another with the city attorney being 22 months old. We have to, as I mentioned, evaluate on an ongoing basis whether it makes sense for us to resume our own administrative process after those 90 days expire, or whether there are reasons why we might continue to stand down. That's a case-by-case analysis. It's a consideration that we make in ongoing conversation with our counterparts in those offices. It's an ongoing conversation that I have with the executive director. And ultimately, we have to decide, in consideration of all the circumstances, does it make sense for the Ethics Commission to invest resources on a matter that one of those offices is still investigating, actively investigating, and hopes to pursue liability for these 3 matters, well, the 2 anyway, that exceed the 90-day window. We have determined that at this point, it is not necessary for the commission to duplicate resources. And in fact, it may be preferable for the commission not to disrupt efforts originating in those offices, but that calculus could change. I would note that there are other investigative holds not reflected in this report for which the Ethics Commission, for which staff have decided those offices are still investigating, but it's time for us to move forward with our own. So because we don't consider those to be on hold, those are not reflected on this list, but there are circumstances in which we make that determination.
Jump in here. I understand the points that you're making about the hierarchy of enforcement actions as between criminal and then, of course, civil action versus the misdemeanor administrative penalty that we can impose. I also understand with some vague understanding, really, that as a city employee, if these investigations involve city employees, that a city employee can be required in an interview to incriminate themselves as part of their employment, whereas certainly if there's a criminal prosecution or investigation proceeding, that's a whole different set of due process referrals. And even more, the other point that you mentioned, because it's something I certainly encountered when there were FBI or district attorney investigations related to the departments that I was working on, that when there is a criminal or civil investigation and witnesses that are being interviewed, the last thing that they want is for an administrative interview to be occurring simultaneously, where a potential witness is clued into a line of questioning before the DA or the city attorney or the FBI have an opportunity to interrogate that witness. And so juggling all that, I assume what you're telling us is that you are in communication with these other entities, the DA and the city attorney's office, if not the FBI anyway, and sizing up the cost benefit or the respective role. And okay, I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that it is there's a balancing there between the commission rigorously enforcing our law and having these other entities who also have enforcement responsibility be able to conduct their work. So Commissioner Bush.
I'd like to suggest that before a decision is made, that there be an executive session of the commission to hear what the issues are so that we have a voice in this process.
All right, I'm going to ask the deputy city attorney, not now, but can you work with the executive director and find out whether or not we could calendar an executive session on any of the pending investigations at the 90-day point decision? So if you can just talk to Director Pelham about issues and how something like that could be captured under the Sunshine Ordinance. I want to see if any other commissioners have their hands up. And back to you, Mr. Pierce, with your presentation.
Sure. Just a brief update for you on the status of accounts before the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue. I know that that's been a topic of ongoing interest with the Commission. The question came up at last month's meeting whether any of these accounts might expire, because I had described a posture that the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue has adopted where, in light of the economic situation, they have taken a kind of softer approach to collecting on these accounts. And Commissioner Chu raised the concern that we may lose our chance to get our hands on any of these debts. As it turns out, one of those accounts, Commissioner Chu, did in fact expire. You may have seen it. That's the one related to Isabel Urbano. My understanding from conversation with the Bureau is that typically the statute of limitations is set by our own law, by the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. The Campaign Finance Reform Ordinance sets a 4-year statute of limitations to collect on any debts. The other ordinances, as far as I can tell, are kind of silent about a specific statute of limitations for collection purposes, as opposed to a statute of limitations for establishing liability in the first instance. The Urbano matter was a lobbyist matter and not a campaign finance matter. And so the Bureau is working with its legal division to identify what those limitations are and whether any of the other matters are coming up to possible expiration. So I've asked that they come back to us at their first ability to identify any other accounts that are, say, within 6 months of expiring. And so they are working with their legal staff to do that. One last thing that I could say about this is that the practice of the Bureau is, as they call it, to archive a debt that has expired. Their view of this is that although the statute of limitations has passed, it does not mean that that money is no longer owed to the city. So they archive the debt and they keep it on file. The Bureau and the Ethics Commission cannot take any actions to collect on that debt, and the Bureau interprets that pretty strictly. They believe that even a phone call would violate that prohibition. Nevertheless, if a debtor like Ms. Urbano owed money in some other capacity, and if for whatever reason she were to overpay on that other account, because the Bureau would have archived this debt, the Bureau could offset the overpayment from the other account and apply it to her debt in this circumstance. So we can't collect the money. We can't take collection actions, but we could keep money that comes into the city nevertheless. And I know that sounds sort of abstract and maybe even improbable, but they assured me that happens on a somewhat regular basis. So I think that's all I might offer about the status of those debts, but I'm happy to answer questions about any of them.
Okay, I see Commissioner Lee, your hand is up, so I'm going to recognize you, Commissioner Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Pierce. I have a question. for some of these people who owe money, they're still active in the political or community circles in the Bay Area or in the city. Have you considered maybe shaming them is a heavy word, but it seems like they continue to make a living while shunning the responsibility of repaying the city the money they owe. So have you considered, or maybe this question is to the city attorney's office, maybe through press briefings or whatever you send out regularly, because these are public information, just to let them know that hey, you just cannot ignore what you are responsible for, because that can also set a deterrent to others that we take these things seriously, because these are the taxpayers' money, and we do have the responsibility to make sure that they abide by these rules and laws. And it's very frustrating that I've been here for over 2 years and it's the same people, same response, basically ignoring the many, professional requests for them to do the right thing.
I share your frustration, Commissioner Lee, and I appreciate the advice about alternative remedies here. I think naming and shaming would be fair. I do think that featuring them on this monthly report is one way that we name and shame those individuals. I'm aware that this month, one of these debtors discovered their name on this list for the first time, and as a result of that, reached out. But I'm very happy to explore other opportunities to promote the delinquency of these accounts and these individuals.
Chair Ambrose, if I may.
Next.
I would echo Commissioner Lee's comments in strengthening our efforts to try and collect. So certainly the time that I have been on the commission, we've been trying to collect from a number of these people. And so I have two comments. One would be in order to continue to highlight the outstanding nature of these debts is, what about including it in press releases every month? At the end, we create the interested persons list, and post it to our website. Here's the list of people who have fees outstanding to the commission. And then second is, far be it for me to tell the Bureau of the Bureau is handling all of these things, but the list only seems to grow longer. And the dates, the referral date, we've got one going back to 2013, 2015, 2016, and it doesn't seem to be very effective. So my question is, what is there, beyond, I mean, we can't control what happens at the Bureau, but, what can we at the Ethics Commission do to try and expedite this, to get a faster and more effective use of time and energy to be able to collect on $100,000+ worth of fees and penalties.
Thank you, Commissioner Chu. I'm happy to explore the possibility of press releases with the executive director. I agree that the list does appear to get longer. I would note that when a debtor pays, we remove them from the list. So it may not be reflected in every month's report that sometimes the Bureau does collect. In the last, I'm looking at their update. I'm not 100% sure what the timeline might be, but I think in roughly the last 6 months, the Bureau has collected on the Ethics Commission's behalf nearly $6,000 in unpaid debts. So there is some success from that office, but I agree that many of these debtors have been on this list for a long time. This month's report does note a number of instances where the staff of the Bureau are considering whether to move forward with small claims actions. So I mentioned that during the pandemic, the Bureau has adopted this soft approach where they don't want to make people's lives unduly difficult, but staff have noted a number of instances where they're going to speak with management and ultimately confer with us, with the Ethics Commission, about whether to move forward with any of those small claims matters. We could at the same time confer with the Bureau about whether we want to take back any of the other accounts and what that would look like. I would only note that, you know, effectively our staff are not as equipped as the Bureau at the process of debt collection, and it would require diverting investigative resources to pursue these debts. But one consideration could be that the Commission has to be increasingly thoughtful about the size of the penalty that it assesses in some of these instances. We do provide under our regulations that a respondent who might be unable to pay can attempt to demonstrate to the Commission that inability. We have noted in some of our more recent stipulations over the last year or two instances where a respondent has partially demonstrated that inability, and so we have diminished the penalty amount to reflect the reality of their financial situation. But ultimately, what I acknowledge we want is not merely to assess penalties, but to have respondents pay those penalties. And so we can be thinking at a sort of policy level about whether our penalties are commensurate with the ability of people to pay, or so I appreciate the feedback, and I imagine that the streamlined program will generate more stipulations of smaller amounts, and that more likely than not, respondents who are handled through the streamlined program will be in a position to pay those penalties. But again, I can't 100% predict that.
Thank you.
You're muted, Commissioner Bush.
Chair Ambrose.
Thank you. Just a minute, Commissioner Bush. I'm going to do the announcement for public comment so we can get people in the queue, and then I'll turn to you while we're waiting to see if anybody calls in. So on this agenda item number 7, if any members of the public intend to offer public comment for this item, they should dial in now and enter *3 to be added to the public comment queue. And while we're waiting to see, moderator, if there are any callers in the queue, Commissioner Bush, we can take your comment.
Thank you. I'd like to associate myself with Commissioner Chu and Commissioner Lee on enforcement alternatives. One is to inform any of the city officials who have appointing authority of people who are in debt and have not paid, but are obligated to pay. So that would be the mayor, the board of supervisors, the assessor, the city attorney, the district attorney, or any of the departments that have advisory committees where they make appointments. So I think in the past, I have seen people who were found to be in violation, and while all of that was being worked out, we're still free to be appointed. For example, the mayor would appoint somebody and the board of supervisors would put them back on. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that if somebody is having to get a license from the city, so example, a lobbyist who has to then renew their ability to lobby and pay the lobby fees, at that time, they should have to pay any back fees that they owe as well. Those are my suggestions.
Suggestions, if you can look into that, Mr. Pierce. I would note, of the 100,000 so we have outstanding through the Bureau of Delinquent Revenues collection efforts, about 75,000 of that is Lynette Sweet and the bankruptcy matter that's pending. And I'm assuming, Mr. Pierce, that you're watching that closely, because I believe from the file that we saw earlier, that there are potentially assets there in bankruptcy that may be available to satisfy that that debt. So making sure that the statute of limitations doesn't run before or however that intersects with the bankruptcy proceedings. And with that, the moderator, do we have any commenters in the queue? You're muted, Ronald. Sorry.
Okay. Hello. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. I do want to remind all panel members, if you are not speaking right now, can you please mute yourself, because there is a lot of feedback right now. Thank you. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently on public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 7, discussion of monthly staff enforcement report. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, we have no callers in the queue. And you're on mute, Chair Ambrose.
You told me to mute myself. Thank you. Okay. So, public comment on agenda item number 7 is closed, and going to move on to agenda item number 8, discussion of executive director's report and update of various programmatic and operational highlights of Ethics Commission staff activities since the Commission's previous meeting. Before you start, Director Pelham, I did want to note, I believe Commissioner Chu, you had informed us that you had to leave the meeting at 12:30. I don't know. That's correct.
That's correct.
All right. So I'm assuming the other 3 commissioners along with me are able to hang in there. So we'll retain a quorum. And then with that, Director Pelham, please proceed.
Great. Thank you, Chair Ambrose. The report, I can be brief. I realize it's been a long morning, but I wanted to highlight several items from the report. In connection with the discussion earlier today on the Controller's Office assessment, the discussion around behested payments came up as part of that report. This Executive Director's report also notes that since the last Commission meeting, on the day that the Controller's report was issued, the Mayor's Office issued a directive, Executive Directive 20-02, that directed department heads to comply with the city's behested payment reporting requirements that apply to city elected officials and members of boards and commissions that are established in Section 3.610 of the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. We, on receiving that directive, internally met and explored what that filing disclosure process would look like for department heads as the executive directive took effect immediately. We identified the process as the one that currently exists for board and commission members. So at present, department heads are able to comply with the mayoral executive directive by going to our website under compliance tabs and following through to behested payments information and behested payment disclosure pages for the public who want to see if disclosures are being made or filed by department heads pursuant to that executive directive. We provided some additional feedback to the mayor's office regarding further information that they might want to look at in advising department heads how they plan to interpret the executive directive. But we're happy to have that tool available at present and have our web pages updated at present so that department heads can follow the directive that was issued on the 24th of September. Separately, on the public financing front, we have now 16 of the 22 Board of Supervisor candidates who opted to participate in the public financing program all qualified to be receiving public funds. We have a total as of as of October 2nd, roughly $2.7 million that candidates have now qualified to receive. I think we're all very excited about looking back on this election experience following the election to really assess and hear from the candidates about the program and how they used it and how they thought the new provisions may have been helpful. This is over 70% participation rate, which is the highest I believe we've seen in the city. It's history of this program. So we're going to want to learn as much as we can from this process. I'm sure you'll be hearing more from us about that in the months to come. But we were happy to see that participation, and we'll be monitoring and of course auditing those funds after the election as required by state law. There was one note that I included in this report as well. One of the candidates who had submitted timely and by the deadline, I issued a revised final determination following my initial determination due to information that was not presented to the committee at the time of their filing. So as detailed in my report, my amended or revised final determination provided that that candidate, Ms. Shinzato, did in fact qualify for public funds. So she's included as one of those 20 or 16 members of the candidates running for Board of Supervisors who has now qualified as well. That information is also updated on our web pages that you'll see in the report. That are using our dashboard, so people can go to that tab and look and find out what's happening on the public financing front. The budget, as you all know by now, was adopted on October the 1st and signed by the mayor. So we have been proceeding to put together our clear hiring plan as best as anything will remain clear over the next few months, given the continuing economic impacts to the city of the COVID pandemic and the city's emergency response. But I spent a bit of time detailing out in this report for your information the starting point for our hiring plan. We have the position vacancies. We know what the amount of money is that we're going to be working with the Department of Human Resources to try and fill those positions on an expedited basis, and also highlighted a rather detailed list of the various stages of the process that governs the hiring process for civil service positions and to some extent the exempt positions as well. And that's here because there are quite a number of steps involved in this process. We've put together a hiring plan, a proposed timeframe. We are meeting next week on the 13th with DHR, a team of staff from DHR, so that we can put together the steps possible to make as much progress on these positions as quickly as possible. I think with that, I'm going to pause. I know there was more information on the audits that I wanted to just share briefly. And that is that when you look at the Commission's audit report pages, you will see that there are now 13 of the 14 audit reports posted and finalized for the publicly financed candidates from the 2018 election. There is one candidate committee that remains unfinished by our external auditors. That's Mr. Leno, who ran for mayor. They have not yet apparently been able to complete their report with our external auditors, so that is outstanding. But other than that, there are 13 of the 14 publicly financed candidates whose audits now appear on our web pages and have been completed. The auditors have been busy with public financing and have not been able to complete the non-discretionary audit reports yet, although a significant amount of work had been done prior to the heat of the election season on that. So we'll continue to keep you updated. And then lastly, Commissioner Chu, I think, had asked the question about the Form 700 filing process and how many how many officials have now filed their statements that were not filed timely on June 1st. We now, as of today, have 10 officials who, 9 of whom did not file their Form 700 timely, and 1 of them did not file their ethics and sunshine training certification timely. So there are 10 individuals who are not yet in compliance. And the next step, as we mentioned last month, would be at this stage to refer them for enforcement for further action as may be warranted. So that's the latest on that. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have for me.
Thank you, Director Pelham. And I'm going to recognize Commissioner Bush. Or did you just take your hand down?
No, I meant to have it up.
Okay, all right.
Director Pelham, what is the situation with DHR, given the fact that there's a number of controversies about how they are handling creating lists for hiring purposes?
Well, I'm not sure if I understand what the issues or controversies are that you're referring to. What I can tell you is the report that I've included here tries to identify the steps that will be necessary for us to hire the positions that we have to the extent that they are civil service positions. One of the agenda items we want to cover with them is have any of those processes changed because of the pandemic environment that we're operating in? Are there expedited procedures that are now in place that haven't been previously that we can take advantage of? So we are working with the client services team to try and come up with the most expedited hiring plan that we can develop. And we've worked with them in the past. We're hopeful that with additional resources and translating to time, that will enable us to do multiple hirings at the same time. And very importantly, I think the other thing from this list that I would emphasize is that the recruitment process and these various steps involved in the selection process often can be quite lengthy if we're starting from scratch. Our office has generally started from scratch in putting together the kind of job description we're looking for, so the people applying for our jobs know what they're getting into. It's not a standard city list. We could take that approach, and that may be something we should consider. But generally, we've put together the kinds of job descriptions that really tell people this is what you're going to be working on at our office, because it is often different from the standard job classification, or at least more detailed than the standard job classification. That requires a whole stream of analysis and vetting and testing to make sure that we have minimum qualifications stated correctly and strongly, and standard knowledge, skills, and abilities stated as clearly and strongly as possible, so that we can design the test, the questions, the essay questions, other tests modes, as effectively as possible to bring in those knowledge, skills, and abilities to the work that this person will be doing. So it's not a very swift process, but it's one that we have significant experience with, I will tell you, over the past 5 years. So we're hoping that what we have in place as building blocks, we'll be able to bring into the meeting next week a portfolio of here's the work that we have done, and we are ready to move forward as quickly as possible. And that we hope that in turn, we'll also learn more about processes that have been expedited through DHR in order to make us have progress on these hirings. Because as you know, we will not be able to do what we have to do unless we have these positions filled, and that's critical. So that is our top organizational priority, as you know.
I'm glad you're tailoring the job description to the situation that we have at ethics. One of the issues in the past has been that was then circulated through a pre-approved list of people, and they did not reach out beyond San Francisco, for example. They didn't go to the LA Ethics Commission or to the FPPC or other agencies that have similar duties to ask if they had any people who would like to apply for our jobs. Is that being done now?
Absolutely. No, we've done that since day one, since I joined the commission. We have generally used a 21-day posting period, which sounded like a long period when I started to some of the folks at DHR, but it seemed a reasonable amount of time to make sure that we could get the word out broadly. But we use our colleagues at the Council on Governmental Ethics Laws. We circulate notices as broadly as we can. That's also one of the things that I think is also important to keep our eye on as well. We want to make sure that we're getting the best skilled and most diverse group of people we can to do the work that we have. And so it really does take thought and effort to not just put it in the usual suspect places, but to really spread the word to audiences, to schools, to organizations, community groups that are very much invested in the work that this commission does. And so we want to reach out as much as possible with the notices that we have in the time that we want to allot.
That's how we got you hired. Do we have any information on solicitation for contributions by commissioners and others for San Francisco?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
In the past, we've raised the question about what are the rules for soliciting contributions to help pay for things like
thank you.
Contributions of services, perhaps, more than, or advisory groups and creation to assist us in our duties.
I do not have more information for you to report at this month. I can tell you we started at the staff level doing research on models, funding models that might exist elsewhere. And Stephen Massing and I have started doing research about what that might look like in the city, but we did not have enough to report to you this month. So I expect that we're going to have more at the November meeting.
You might take a look
that
at
also
the
is
Department of Elections. They have advisory committees.
I can follow up with John Arts on that. Thanks.
I want to go ahead actually and read the notice of invitation for public comment, and then if there are other commissioners who have questions for the director, we can take those there. So if there are any members of the public that intend to offer public comment for this agenda item 8, the executive director's report, they should dial in now and enter *3 to be added to the public comment queue. Moderator, let us know if there are any public comment in the queue. And I did want to ask really quickly, Director Pelham, on the mayor's executive directive to department heads to disclose behested payments, one of the things I'm curious about is whether or not that also applies to designees within the department. So if the director of the department has delegated to their communications director, somebody, to go out and solicit funds for some department event, as that the department head, I mean, is any solicitation for anything for a departmental activity attributable to the department head, or if it's the communications director who's doing the solicitation, then that doesn't get disclosed. So I just, I don't know if you know the answer off the top of your head, but I think it's something when we come back and look at those issues for the legislation itself. What we're trying to get to on that, I think, is not what, Jane Doe department head is behesting as payments, but who are the donors who have business before that department who are being hit up for money that benefits the department. So it's not who's asking, but the fact that it's somebody is asking on behalf of the department that's regulating the donor that's giving the money. So anyway, just if you can reflect on that.
Yeah, happy to. And just as a note of follow-up, we can certainly relay that feedback informally to the mayor's office team. We did do some issue spotting in looking at the language when it came out. There are some places where it may make more, it doesn't make sense as the language is currently written about, it's not clear how it applies to department heads. So we highlighted some of that information. This is something we can relay as well, but as I read it, it speaks to the department director's activities, not other staff. That may be an issue that they want to advise on further by expanding the scope so that it makes sense according to the directive's intent, and we can certainly relay that information on the commission's behalf to the mayor's office team.
Yes, we'll have to come back through, because the same issue is there with the Board of Supervisors legislation. I mean, just in drafting, you start with what is the problem that you want to solve, and that is we don't want department decision-making to be beholding to people who are paying for their holiday party. And it doesn't matter who asks them. I think there's some other questions too, as we get into the legislation about, why they're getting around the gift rules. So it's perfectly legitimate for organization, a corporation, a contractor to gift money to the city, say to help with the Clean Streets program, et cetera. But if it's over 10,000, they have to go to the board, or it has to be posted on the departmental website. If it's under 10,000, we need to look in-house in terms of, is that process too arduous for people to go through, and so they create this third-party funding, or where the Parks Alliance, they don't go to the board, they just throw the money into some special fund at a fiscal agent, and then they can spend it more quickly. I mean, sometimes I mean, let's face it, contracting, you gift the money to the city and then they want to go out and hire somebody to provide rain barrels for giving out for drought resistance. And by the time you put out the competitive bid for the rain barrel maker, you're going to be, into the following fiscal year. So, I mean, I think those are some city homework that we need to do to figure out how to facilitate charitable giving to the city in a way that's timely and, per the controller's office is subject to expenditure controls and disclosure. But anyway, those are my off the top comments. And Mr. Moderator, do we have any public commenters in the queue?
Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently on public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 8, discussion of Executive Director's report. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Also, as a reminder to the public comment may also be submitted in writing and will be shared with the Commission after this meeting has concluded and will be included as part of the official meeting file. Written comments should be sent to ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Once again, written comments should be sent to ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Madam Chair, there are no calls in the queue.
All right, with that, then I'm going to close public comment on agenda item 8 and call agenda item 9, which is a discussion and possible action on items for future meetings. And before I invite commissioners to comment on whether or not they have items that they'd like on for future discussion, I'm going to read the notice to the public that if any member of the public intend to offer public comment for this item, they should dial in now and enter *3 to be added to the public comment queue. And I will take their public comment after I ask my fellow commissioners who, if anyone wants to identify specific matters that they'd like to see discussed at future meetings. And I assume, let's see, I realize Commissioner Lee, you don't show up on my, there you are at the bottom. Okay. Commissioner Bush, go ahead.
Thank you. I asked that a newspaper article from San Francisco Public Press be circulated to the commissioners and made available to the public as well. It deals with incidences around the 2015 election that showed that there was a meeting called together by the mayor and senior members of the Board of Supervisors with city contractors, lobbyists, unions, and others, laying down an edict, as it were, that said that they wanted contributions made to one candidate and not made to another candidate. That was a subject of some examination, though I wouldn't go so far as to call it an investigation by the city attorney, but nothing was done. However, this was widely covered. It was in the Examiner, it was in the Chronicle, it was in the public press, it was in Mission Local. And I think that it would be a good case study for us to talk about how corruption works in the city. And the reason I circulated it is because I wanted people to have a chance to see what the public was seeing about this particular incident, and to have a view of what corrective actions are needed. Is it just a question of enforcement, or is it a question of policy? Is it the way things were worded? I noticed that in the article, Executive Director Pelham is quoted as saying that regardless, Ethics Commission didn't have the resources to go much further than it had done. And that would include, I assume, the resources to pursue a subpoena for any of the witnesses who were unwilling to talk voluntarily to the city attorney's office. Since this is on point with the issues that are raised by the U.S. attorney, by the controller, by the city attorney, and now to our IP meeting, I wanted to use this because taking something off of the draft of policy writing into the real world is, I think, imperative. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bush. Yes, I did see that the article that you referenced was at least shared with the commissioners, and thus too, it's within our public communications, public file. And I understand that these were issues that we're going to raise at the interested persons stakeholder meeting as well. I agree with you. I like the idea of a real world example. And I mean, it almost frankly reads like a law exam. Can you spot the potential violations of the ethics code as referenced in that news article? And so I think that would be a good way to illustrate some of the concerns that we could hopefully address as part of the conflict of interest and code review that we're going to undertake. With that, I'm going to stop though and ask the moderator, do we have any public commenters in the queue? And I'm going to look to see if Yvonne has her hand up. No? Okay.
Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently on the public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 9, discussion and possible action on items for future meetings. If you haven't already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you are online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no calls in the queue.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to close public comment on agenda item number 9 and call agenda item 10, which is an additional opportunity for public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda pursuant to Ethics Commission bylaws, Article 7, Section 2. If any members of the public intend to offer public comment for this item, they should dial in now and enter *3 to be added to the public comment queue. Can I ask moderator, the phone numbers of the individuals who showed up for agenda item 2, which is general public comment, but then were silent, have they been carried forward on the public comment on any of the specific agenda items, and or are they reappearing under this general comment opportunity now? Just still a little worried about the fact that we had.
No. No, basically they were carried on to other agenda items. They did chime in for those other agenda items. There's no public, those numbers are not appearing on the queue right now.
Okay, all right. So we did hear from them on specific agenda items.
That is correct.
All right, very good. Okay, so if you can check to see if there are any public commenters in the queue for agenda item number 10.
We are checking to see if there's callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined the meeting, we are currently on public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 10, additional opportunities for public comments on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda pursuant to Ethics Commission bylaws, Article 7, Section 2. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
All right, then. So I'm going to close public comment on agenda item number 10 and call agenda item number 11, which is adjournment. Commissioners, do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
All right, Commissioner Smith, and do I have a second? Someone needs to.
Second it.
I'll second.
Okay, second by Commissioner Bush and Lee. So with that, can you please call the roll on adjournment?
A motion has been made and seconded to. I will now call roll. Commissioner Bush,
Yes.
Commissioner Chu.
She's no longer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Vice Chair Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Chair Ambrose.
Yes. The motion to adjourn carries, and thank you. That would conclude our October 9th, 2020 meeting of San Francisco Ethics Commission. And I hope you all